Hey there and welcome to Olivia's Catastrophe. I am Olivia-Savannah and today we're here for a Read It Backwards video. So if you're new here and you don't know what Read It Backwards is, I have a video that I'll link up above and down below for you, which you should really go and watch so that you don't get too confused. And for today's Read It Backwards, we are going to be reading Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. So this is the first book in the Twilight series, but it's the last one I'm reading for Read It Backwards. I've already done my Read It Backwards of Breaking Dawn, Eclipse and New Moon, so I have links to all three of those down below if you would like to watch those before you watch this one, whichever way you want to do it. I've also got to tell you two more things before we get started. The first one is that the representation of the Quileute tribe in this one is very poorly done and very bad. And this tribe at the moment in real life is trying to move to higher ground because they are in a danger zone. And if you would like to donate to that, there'll also be a link down below, top link down there. And as I have pledged, every time I mention the Twilight saga in any of my videos, I will make a donation myself. And last but not least, you need to know that this video is going to contain
spoilers.
I read the first quarter of Twilight, which is actually 100 pages, so we're going to dive right in. The first thing I need to let you know is that I've decided to abandon having a tabbing system. It wasn't really working for me and it's not really my kind of thing. I only really tab if I have to for university, so I've decided to exclude that from Read It Backwards from here on out. But we're still going to have some discussions about what's happening in this book. So the first thing I want to note is that the synopsis on the back of this book already tells you that Edward is a vampire. And the majority of this book, as far as I can remember, is Bella trying to guess or figure out that he's a vampire and then learn about him being a vampire. So the fact that the synopsis tells you that, if you are reading it for the first time now and you have been hiding under a rock and you don't know what the Twilight saga is really about, it kind of gives you spoilers. Like, there was no way any of us in the beginning when we first read this series could be surprised by him turning out to be a vampire because, hey, the synopsis gives it away. It's quite endearing that immediately at the beginning of the book, Bella sees that truck and she's in love with it. I love seeing Bella's love for the truck. I think I've mentioned that before and it's just so nice to see straight there from the get-go. And also Charlie, he's such a sweetheart from the get-go. He's so excited that Bella is arriving. He bought her a truck. Later on he put some chains on her wheels so that she's safe. Like, even though he doesn't communicate his love much, his actions really do show that he loves Bella. When Bella is feeling anxious about going to school for the first time, she mentions that she doesn't relate to people her own age, and I can't help but think, is that foreshadowing? Because Edward is clearly not her own age and the person she ends up relating to the most. We've got the moment where Bella first sees the Cullens for the very first time and she immediately mentions that they're all sitting there with plates of food and not touching them. Like, who are the Cullens even trying to fool with plates full of untouched food? It makes more sense if you don't get any food, because then people seem to have this concept or idea that you've been eating, you know, in the hallway while walking to class, or maybe that you're someone who fasts lunch or something. But the fact that you just have a lot of food there in front of you and don't touch it is a lot more suspicious. Then we've got Jessica explaining to Bella, like, oh, this is them, they do this, and Bella notices immediately that Ed was kind of listening and reacting to the conversation, and she also tends to notice his eyes and the fact that his eyes change colour at some point, and the fact that Bella notices these things just by paying like 2 seconds of attention to the Cullens gives me the impression that their secret would have been out a lot faster, a lot easier, because they're doing a rubbish job at hiding it. Between the food thing and the reacting to the conversation and the eye changing, anyone with 5 spans of attention, I don't think that makes sense, would figure out their secret. Also in this book, there's more of a distinction made between the Hales and the Cullens, and you know what, I never make that distinction just because the book decides to totally forget that distinction after Twilight, but it's entertaining to see mentioned here. Temporary location switch so that people downstairs can watch TV while I continue talking. So when Bella and Edward have their first encounter and Edward's leaning away from her and is being really essentially not nice, even though she doesn't know it's because he's trying to not eat her, she notes that his eyes are coal black, and I'd never really paid attention to that little detail that she notices, because it does mean that he's actually very, very hungry, and therefore she's extra hard to resist, on top of being an absolutely delicious scented human being. And Bella is upset, obviously, about Edward's aversion to her, and I have to admit, if I were in Bella's situation, I also would be very upset that that's happening. Always remember that Twilight is actually a very, very incredibly slow-paced book, and it's especially driven home where we have pages which are just about her doing dishes or doing chores or cooking, and I feel like that wouldn't necessarily fly today in contemporary or like paranormal romance books if it's not really moving the plot forwards. So I do think that there are parts of this book that could definitely have been cut because they're just not interesting and they're not necessary. I really was happy when I saw that Bella hated snow when I first read this. I hate snow, Bella hates snow, we'd be friends. Shortly after this, she sees Edward and Edward shoots her his very first crooked smile. Now you can go through this book and you could probably go through the whole series and see how many times crooked smile has been mentioned. I've been noting it as I've been reading it, but I don't think I've mentioned it in a Read It Backwards, that Stephanie Meyer loves Edward's crooked smile, as does Bella, and it's constantly mentioned. The onion root lab scene is constantly seared in my mind, not just because of the book where it's the first time that Edward's actually talking to her and he's being polite, but just because, you know, in the films there's this golden onion that you can win and then they just leave the classroom carrying this golden onion and it's hilarious. I'm going to mention the film in this Read It Backwards a bit more just because the first film is quite iconic. It's objectively the worst film of all the film adaptations, but it's also the funniest because it is the worst film. So in that onion root lab, when Edward's having a conversation with Bella, he is so captivated by everything that she is saying. Now this is one of those moments where Twilight is actually more enjoyable on a reread than on a first reading of it, because if you're rereading it and you know everything to do about vampirism and Edward's vampirism, and you know the fact that he can't know what she's thinking and he has to listen to what she says, is incredibly frustrating for him, but also makes her incredibly interesting. That makes that whole conversation, the duality of it, a bit more enjoyable when you're reading it, and I always find it so funny how fascinated he is and how shocked Bella is by that. And if you're doing a reread, you get to see all of the inward jokes that Edward is just having by himself, because Edward's just weird like that. He makes inside jokes when he's having conversations with other people. So he's like, oh yeah, I'm usually a good reader of people, and Bella doesn't know anything about what he's yamming on about, but to Edward that's a hilarious joke. I have to say, I have to ask, why is everyone so attracted to Bella? I'm not saying that Bella is not a beautiful human being who is unique in her very special way. I'm just saying she's not that different from everybody else in that school, and yet everyone is in love with her. I don't really like when we have main characters where everyone is in love with them and obsessed with them, and it's just like, why? How? Why? So Edward saves Bella from the car crash that Tyler, you know, instigates, and again, I have to say that the film does the hospital scene better, because in the film we have Tyler constantly apologizing, then Charlie just closes the curtain like, I ain't listening to this. And we also have Carlisle bursting into the room like, I heard the chief's daughter was in town, and it's just so iconic. Like, a Cullen can't have a less dramatic entrance. They need those dramatic entrances, and Carlisle is essentially the same, even though he's like top tier vampire. So I find that the film does this whole scene better, because in the book it's a bit tedious. Like, we're hearing about her wanting to escape and she can't, and it's all this doctor talk and I don't really care about it. But yeah, the main point that we can take away from this is that Bella knows something is up with Edward straight from the car crash, and when she asks to talk to Edward alone about this whole situation, Edward is so bad at keeping a secret. Like, she makes accusations and Edward concedes the point very quickly by switching over into defensive, like almost immediately. And that switch to defensive is just going to make Bella more suspicious. He needs to play it cool, he needs to play it calm, and you think after being a vampire for what, 100 years, he would know how to be a bit more discreet, keep his temper a little bit more. But no, Edward in this book has total emotional whiplash. He goes from one mood to the other so quickly. I don't even get why Bella sticks around him, because he is so mean to her sometimes and then suddenly so nice, and if a man's treating you that way, he ain't worth your time. I also have to lol at Mike and then Eric and then Tyler asking her out to this dance even though it's supposed to be girls' choice, and I feel like all of these rejections are just warming Bella up for the amount of times that she has to reject Jacob later on in the series. Also, can we talk about how Bella crushes so hard on Edward when she really doesn't know anything about him? She's like, oh, he's so brilliant and gorgeous and mysterious and interesting. And I'm like, hold on, you've had like 2 conversations and all of them have been about you and not about him. You know nothing about him other than he looks like he needs some sun and he's got brown hair. Sometimes the writing in this one makes me cringe. It's the kind of writing that I would like to say nobody would get away with today, but then I recently read The Hating Game, so I guess some people can get away with it. So it's in situations where Edward's mood changes, then Bella's like, what, do you have multiple personality disorder? Or something happens and then Bella's like, oh, Edward was talking to me like a mentally handicapped, and those are quoting the book, and it's just a bit you could write this more sensitively. So this kind of writing, I feel like it shouldn't fly today. Then we've got the first cafeteria meal where Edward asks Bella to sit with him, and they're kind of sitting apart from everybody else, and we have a very cryptic conversation where Edward's referencing a whole load of stuff that Bella can't understand at all. But if you are rereading Twilight, then you understand everything that he's referencing, even down to him saying things like, well, if I'm going to hell, I might as well do it thoroughly, which is essentially him talking about his religious debate, which is a big part of the later books. So it's definitely one that's, again, more interesting upon reread or when you know everything. And there's one point where Edward's like, what if I'm not the good guy? What if I'm the bad guy? And that phrase has been entirely ruined for me, because as soon as I read that I was like, cue Billie Eilish. Don't even like that song, but it's stuck in my head. I also find it very ironic that Bella falls for Edward when she can't handle blood. We've had the scene where they have to prick their finger in school. Like, do schools really do that? Because my school never did something like that, and I feel like it's just not really an interesting thing for a school to do. But either which way, she had to prick her finger, she didn't do it, she fainted, blah blah blah. Edward came to her rescue, finding that Edward's even rescuing her from a blood related situation when he is a vampire. And last but not least, after reading this quarter, all I can say is that I can't wait for Bella to get her job. I feel like that has been the biggest mystery of the Read It Backwards. I want to know when, how or where Bella gets that job at Mike's shop, because I expected her to have gotten it during New Moon, but in New Moon she already had it, so it has to happen at some point in this book, and if this book doesn't mention it, I'm gonna hit the roof. So we go down to the La Push beach, and there is Jacob for the very first time, and Jacob looks, from Bella's judgment, to be about 14 or 15, so he's definitely rocking the young boy look, and I just feel a bit awkward when Bella flirts with him, and even more awkward when Mike sees Bella and Jacob together and gets jealous of Bella flirting with him. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school and I was 17 and then there were the 14 to 15-year-old kids, we just didn't associate. Like, they seemed way younger and way less mature than us. I know it's only 2 years between, or like 2 or 3 years between, but I feel like a lot of development happens between 14 to 15 and 17. Of course, you guys can be friends, but the whole flirting thing just makes me a little bit uncomfortable thinking back onto how my secondary school experience was. And then there's the guy that says the Cullens don't come here, and I didn't realise that was Sam and that we meet him that early on into the books. I was just surprised to see his name even come up. So also when Jacob's talking about the legends, he makes it seem like he doesn't want to be associated with them, and that these legends are just superstition and he doesn't believe in them. And I feel like it's worse in New Moon, but because it's worse in New Moon, it doesn't excuse that we have that kind of behaviour here in the Twilight Saga, and it just goes to show how the native representation in this one is just really, really poor. Also, I just want to say that Bella is flirting and using Jacob to get these stories from him. So Bella has essentially been using Jacob and abusing their relationship since day one. There was not a single day of their friendship where she wasn't trying to get something from Jacob, because she goes from trying to get stories from Jacob to later on trying to get Billy Black off of her back, and then trying to get over Edward. So basically Bella just uses Jacob from the beginning, and I know I've never shipped Bella and Jacob before, but even more than ever I just feel like Jacob deserves a whole lot better than what Bella is able to give him. He deserves someone who actually is interested in himself. I guess he gets that in Renesmee, but we don't want to go down that road about the relationship again. Bella is the worst friend to Jessica ever. There's so many times in this book where Jessica's talking to Bella and Bella's like, oh, I'm distracted, I'm not listening to Jessica. In fact, even the first time she meets Jessica, where we don't even know Jessica's name, I know that she was talking about Jessica because she said the person was talking and she wasn't listening. She is so rude to Jessica. The only time that an actual conversation between her and Jessica happens where Bella is paying attention the whole way through is the time when she is telling Jessica how she feels about Edward, and Edward's kind of listening into the conversation through Jessica's mind, so it kind of has that duality of reasons why Bella's invested in this conversation. Can't believe how rude she is to Jessica. And aside from that, I want to take a moment to focus on Angela, because Angela is such a nice friend. She's so calm, she's always there for Bella, she always answers Bella's questions, and she gets so little in return. Angela is so nice, but she also deserves better than Bella as a friend. I'm mostly saying this because they have that little trip where they go to Port Angeles to find dresses, and Bella kind of gets herded by these men who are intending to sexually assault her, and I just want to say that that's quite a scary scene. Again, with Rosalie and her backstory, sometimes Stephanie Meyer touches on these really dark themes and scary moments, but it kind of gets lost in the fact that, hey, Twilight is a paranormal romance book and it's just kind of rubbish, or people love it, or it's nostalgic, or it's trash, and we forget that there's some very scary or dark moments in it, which is still the stark reality for a lot of female people around the world. And then we have the scene where Edward's in the restaurant with Bella and they're kind of talking about things, and Bella's asking questions about him being a vampire or what he is and trying to understand. And there's this waiter who's flirting with Edward, and teenage me ate this whole scene up. I feel like Edward's particularly cute in this scene where he's like trying not to answer some questions but trying to subtly answer others, and you know what, teenage me ate it up, and adult me is still eating it up as well. I live for this scene. So Bella guesses a lot of things. Bella guesses that he can read minds and they have this cute hypothetical situation going on. And Bella also is aware of the fact that the darker his eyes are, aka the more hungrier he is, the worse of a mood that he's in. And I'm not sure which read it backwards it was. I think it was Eclipse, where Edward suddenly has this mind shift or this point of view shift that's quite like a huge turnaround, like Mr. Darcy levels of turnaround. And I was saying how it's because Edward is hangry. Well, Bella has just proven that it likely is because Edward was hangry, because I forgot that she actually noticed Edward's hangriness herself. So I just want to say, past Olivia, you were completely correct. And then we have to talk about how unreactive Bella is to everything. Edward's like, oh yeah, I'm a vampire, and Bella's like, okay. And Edward's like, oh yeah, I stalked you all the way to Port Angeles, and then Bella's also like, I feel safe around you. That's okay. No, Bella, it's not okay that he was stalking you. I just want to take Bella and shake her sometimes. And because we have to talk about it, in the films, the whole confession of being a vampire is a lot more dramatic. They like walk into the woods and Bella's facing away from Edward and Edward's talking to her back for some reason. Maybe it's to show that she really doesn't care that he's a predator and she's showing her back even though that makes her vulnerable. I don't know why they chose to do it that way, but either which way, in this book we just get a car scene. They're just sitting in the car and Bella just confesses that she knows that he's a vampire and they're just driving and nothing dramatic is happening. But I guess in this book, seeing as the back tells you he's a vampire, the fact that he's a vampire, the revelation is not such a big deal. Again, Bella has no reaction. But also, I just want to say the line is so iconic. How old are you? 17. How long have you been 17? A while. I love it so much. I'm such a little fangirl. Oh, it's embarrassing sometimes. At some point in their conversations, Edward says, if I needed to, I would hurt myself by hurting you, by leaving, because it's better off for you. And I guess that's just foreshadowing of everything that happens in New Moon, because that's essentially the whole plot. Edward thinks it's safer for Bella if he leaves, and then he goes and does that. And I totally forgot that he actually says he would do that in the first book. Also, so many of their conversations take place within the school cafeteria or in class or whatever. And yeah, it's very easy to forget that this is such a secondary school or American high school story, because so much of it takes place in high school, even more than some contemporaries these days. So even though it's a paranormal romance, it's still like a coming of age high school story. There's just so many funny moments in this book. So for example, they're sitting at the cafeteria and Edward's talking about his hunting trip with Emmett, and Bella's just making these offhand comments trying to hide what she really feels. And Edward's like, oh yeah, Emmett loves Grizzly. And then Bella's like, nothing better than a good old Grizzly. And I just love seeing that back and forth in that conversation. And sometimes we do have to applaud Stephanie Meyer for her follow through, because there's just so many things she lightly casually mentions in Twilight, and then all the way at the end of the series we get that sweet redemption of it actually happening. Like Bella saying, oh, I would love to see you hunt, and Edward's like, no way, that can never happen, with all of his dramatic mood swings as usual that happens in this book. But in the fourth book, they kind of reference this conversation and Bella's like, finally, I'm going to get to see what hunting is like. And they reference mountain lions being Edward's favourite. And I just love follow-throughs like that, where you can really see some payoff for paying attention in the first book. And also we have to talk about Mike. So Mike keeps persisting after Bella, even though Bella's pretty explicitly told him, no, go after Jessica, stop going after me, I don't want you to pursue me. And then sometimes Mike does some things that are just so cute that I'm like, oh, I really like this friendship. Like when he still offers to play on Bella's side in tennis and gym, even though it's dangerous to him and Bella's kind of rubbish at gym, he still offers to do that anyway. And then he goes and ruins it by making comments about Edward afterwards. So it's just a bit of a... it's a wavy line when it comes to Mike. He can be really annoying, but sometimes he can be really sweet. I would also like to take a brief moment to acknowledge that the casting for all of her friends, Mike, Eric, Angela, and Jessica in the film is spot on. And last but not least, the last part that I just read is Edward asking all of these questions about Bella, such as her favourite colour, her favourite jewel, and you just know, if you know that he's a vampire with brilliant memory, that he's memorising all of these details so that he can use them to make her happy later on in her life. And that is just one of the cutest and sweetest things, and one of those times when I'm endeared towards Edward. I feel like Edward is the least problematic in this book and in the last book. The last book, the second half, when him and Bella are on even playing field because they're both vampires, so all of that problematic element kind of dissipates because he doesn't have to protect her anymore or any of that jazz. But also in this book it's quite a bit less problematic. There's still the stalking her while she's sleeping situation and the whole I can't leave her to her own devices, but he doesn't have such a big claim on her yet, and because he doesn't have that big claim he can't control her, so therefore the romance is a bit more romantic at times. But that's all I've got to say for up to halfway through the book. So the first thing I need to say is that Edward briefly says that Twilight is the safest time for them as vampires, but he kind of glosses over the fact of why that is, and I can't understand why that would be, seeing as they can go out in the night if they want to and they can go out in the day if they want to. It makes more sense that the night would be the safest time for them, especially as they talk about how when they're not in the northern hemisphere they have to kind of be out only at night. So I don't understand this whole Twilight business for purposes other than having an aesthetic book title. Bella also mentions being sad just because Edward is too perfect and beautiful, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. So then they go to the meadow, which is a place that I love. I love Bella and Edward's meadow. They spend less time there than I thought I did from my memory, and from reading this series backwards I see that they spend less time there than I expected, but I still love the meadow nonetheless. And while they're there, Edward shows his sparkly vampire self. Now there have been many debates over the years about whether these vampires should be sparkling or if that is just too far off of the mythology for them even to be counted as vampires, and I say they're still vampires, just because I like when people are creative with other things. I like when people are creative with their concepts of mermaids or their concepts of sirens, as long as the thing that keeps the creature true to itself stays the same. I expect mermaids and sirens to have some affinity to water in some way or form, and I expect vampires to have some affinity to blood in some way and form, and if you've got those basics down, then do what you want with the mythology, I say, and I like that this one does something different with that mythology. It's also interesting to see Edward having to move away from Bella because he's just so tempted to eat her, which sounds a bit ridiculous when you say it, but as I said in my other Read It Backwards videos, Edward quickly overcomes the concept of Bella as a yummy person he wants to eat. Not that he overcomes it, but he's so controlled that you forget that he has that attraction to her, and the romance kind of doesn't focus on the fact that he wants to eat her but he's in love with her, but focuses more on outward evils that want to eat Bella. So it's just nice seeing that as the core of the tension once again. And then Edward has his very dramatic moment in the meadow where he's like, as if you could outrun me, as if you could fight me off, and I'm just there like, yeah, Edward, we get it. You're a vampire, you don't have to be so dramatic about the whole thing. I have to say, in this meadow there are some declarations of love made, and it still feels too quick. I don't know if I'm getting a bit too picky with my romances or whatever, but it still feels like they haven't actually had that much time getting to know each other. I mean, it's been 200 and something pages so far, but there was a lot of those pages where they weren't even on talking terms, and then they're briefly on talking terms and they're already like, oh, I love you. And I just seems a bit fast. It still seems fast to me. And then Edward goes running with Bella, and Bella's shocked, and at the end of this run they have a kiss, and Bella kind of like has this huge reaction, which I just find so funny because I feel like that's one of the most ridiculous things in this book, is Bella's reactions to the kissing, and she just can't handle it, which is hilarious. I know it just disappears in the other books, and I'm kind of grateful for that because it was a bit over the top and it was a bit over dramatic and it just kind of took me out of the story, but it is still quite hilarious to read. At some point in this whole meadow scene, Bella calls Edward's hunger for her blood his need, and I was just like, please, please don't do this. Please don't call Edward's hunger his need. It just, I don't know, I don't like that term. They're in the car journey back from the meadow when Edward reveals his age, and he's all like, I was born in Chicago in 1901. And already, as soon as Edward admits his age, Bella is thinking and plotting, how am I going to become a vampire? So I just want to tell you that your girl, she was determined from day one to become a vampire. As soon as she knew how old Edward was, she wasn't thinking, wow, I'm dating someone who's over 100 years old. She was thinking, how do I get to be a vampire as well? Immediately after that, Edward actually explains everybody's backstory. He kind of blurs over it all, and I totally forgot that he actually tells you the backstory of everyone in this book, and I guess that must have been something that was very popular or interesting to readers, because then in the following books she takes the time to go into detail with everybody's backstory all over again, but with a lot more detail and nuance. Well, excepting Esme and Emmett, but everybody's under the impression that nobody cares about Esme and Emmett, and admittedly it might be true in Esme's case. I don't really care for her, but maybe that's just because she's stopping my Jalal shit from happening, which is Jacob and Carlisle, if you didn't know. But Emmett, his backstory deserved a bit more time, but I guess he wasn't conscious enough to tell it himself. Reading this one, I can also clearly tell that Stephanie Meyer's writing does get better the further into the series we get. So while this is my favourite book, I have to admit it's the least well written one. I feel like in this one she tries to go for the classic gothic style a bit too much. We've got exclamation marks and we've got punctuation that seems more classic gothic style, and I can get that that's pertaining to the genre that she's aspiring after. A gothic romance with a vampire makes a lot of sense, but she forgets she's also writing for contemporary young adult age kind of situation, and I feel like the later books reflect that a little bit more than this first one does. This first one's got more of the classical edge to it. Edward and Bella have a long period of time where they're just talking about love and first love so abstractly. They talk about it as if it's not related to themselves, and they're kind of talking about it as a concept rather than something that they're feeling in this moment, which struck me as not very young adult friendly. I feel like young adult genre, you don't really talk about first love like that. Sure, you can remark on it and reflect on it, but just not to the degree and not in the way that they do in this book. So that struck me as a bit odd, and it kind of stood out. I do like the discussion, but it makes more sense if you're an adult talking about love and experiencing first love than a teenager, which I guess Edward technically is, but Bella sure is not. After this discussion, on the same day, Bella asks Edward about marriage and about how marriage would work for them, and I'm just like, hold up girl, you were talking about declaring your love a couple hours ago. You don't need to hop onto the marriage train yet. And then there's a second kiss, and this time when they kiss, Bella forgets to breathe and actually faints. So all of those young adult books out there where characters hold in a breath that they didn't even know they were holding, Stephanie Meyer one-ups the job and actually has the character faint from holding in their breath. I want to say Twilight is superior in that aspect. It takes that common phrase and drives it home. Bella and Edward go to the Cullens' place, and Bella's introduced to the family for the first time, and it's just so funny seeing Carlisle and Esme be so careful with Bella and so measured in their actions, and then Alice like flaunts herself by like zooming in and just acting her natural self and like destroying everything that Carlisle and Esme were trying to do. Love, love, love it. And also, I must correct myself, because I mentioned how Jasper shouldn't need to stay away from Bella. He goes to secondary school all the time. Why should he, you know, be more inclined to eat Bella than any of those students that he's around every single day? I said that, and then someone commented that actually it's Edward's idea for Jasper to stay back, and Jasper is not actually fighting extra temptation or anything. It was just Edward's being overprotective. And reading this one, that's true. Edward says it was me, Jasper's fine actually, I just want him to stay back. Oh, there's such a funny moment where Edward plays piano and it's Bella's lullaby, and Bella starts to cry, and then Edward reaches over and takes one of her tears and eats it. Edward eats one of Bella's tears, and then they look at each other and then they move on with the conversation, and I'm just like, what's going on here? He ate one of your tears. Can we just have a moment to address the weirdness of that situation? Is it just because like Edward can't eat her blood, so he's like, maybe her tears are gonna give me a taste tester? I don't know what's going on, but that was so funny. Also, Carlisle is 362 years old. 362! Maybe it's a bit wrong for me to be shipping him with Jacob, who's what, 15, 16, 17 by the end of the series? He's 362. And last but not least, Edward mentions that he's so scared that he's going to say something to Bella, and the running and the screaming is going to happen and she's going to run off and not want to have anything to do with the vampires anymore. And that just threw me back to when I was rereading Eclipse, which I read before this one, where Edward takes Victoria's head off and then he's approaching Bella so carefully because it's the first time that Bella's seen him dismember someone, and he's so worried that the running and the screaming is going to happen 3 books down the line. The fact that that follow through of this like reference makes that whole scene later on in the series more impactful. It gets me. Sometimes Stephanie Meyer does get to my heart. I have to say, the next scene that we started from where I finished off was the baseball scene, and the baseball scene is infinitely done better in the film. That's just a fact of life. That is iconic filming right there, but the baseball scene is always a fantastic one. First thing that she thinks about is Charlie, and the first thing she's worried about is Charlie's safety, and I kind of love that she is always thinking about Charlie. Also, Edward is driving them away from Forks and Bella's like, no, we need to go back and save Charlie, and Edward's just like, Emmett, bind her hands. And then Bella says, don't you want to hear my idea? And Edward immediately is like, no, we're doing this my way for once. And I'm just like, wow, just take a second to even listen to your girlfriend now. And Bella explains her plan, and you just know that if a plan gets explained in that much detail in a book, it's definitely not going to go according to plan, because when you get to know the plan, you know it won't go according to plan, and if they keep the plan secret, then it means that the plan's going to work, but they don't want you to know that it's going to work yet, so that was kind of inevitable. Also, I have no idea what Charlie must think about this whole situation. Bella goes on literally 1 date with Edward and then she wants to leave Forks completely, and Edward also treats her so badly in New Moon. If I was Charlie, I would never let Edward marry her, because in Charlie's eyes, Edward has just done wrong after wrong after wrong. And actually the whole hunting scene is way scarier than it feels like when you read this. Like, if I try and imagine myself in Bella's position with this vampire that's obsessed with hunting her until she's dead, it is actually quite scary. Most times when they tack some action on at the end of the book, I'm not a big fan of that in the Twilight saga. I don't really care about the action scenes that come right at the end of the book, but in Twilight it's actually one that I feel a bit more invested in, a bit more interested in, which I guess is why I like this one the most out of the whole series. Before they head to Phoenix, and there's a moment where there's just Jasper and Bella by themselves, and Bella's like, oh, she's stressing, she's worried, and Jasper goes, Bella, it's okay, you're worth it. And I'm like, what are you, a L'Oreal ad? Because you're worth it, Bella, because you're worth it. Also, while they're in the hotel room and it's Alice, Jasper and Bella in the hotel room, Bella lists all the Cullens that she's worried about getting hurt, protecting her, and she's like, what if something happens to Carlisle or Esme or Edward or Emmett? And she doesn't list Rosalie. We see that discreet shade being thrown at Rosalie. I mean, not that Rosalie doesn't deserve it because of how she's been treating Bella, but still, I just found that hilarious that she lists literally everyone except for Rosalie. Also, as a true Twilight fan, I've read a lot of commentary and criticism of the books, and people always mention the fact that when the hunter comes and does this phone call with Bella, basically Alice, who's in the next room, should have heard Bella's end of the conversation, but not just Bella's end of the conversation. With her super hearing, she should have been able to also hear the voice coming through the phone. So the fact of the matter is that Alice should have known what Bella was planning and intending to do. People also mention that when Jasper is outside of the bathroom and Bella runs through the bathroom and starts running away, Jasper should have been able to hear her footsteps speed up and hear that she runs further than a bathroom should allow, and therefore be right on her track. These are true plot holes. Get to the part where Bella is with the tracker, and even the tracker's like, wow, this particular human has no sense of self-preservation, which is absolutely true. I just find it funny that this person who wants to kill her, who's known Bella for about 2 minutes total, knows that Bella has a lack of self-preservation. It's one of my least favourite tropes in any character. This is why I love rereading books. I have reread this book 1,000,000 times or more, and yet every single time I reread this book, I realise something new or a little detail that I've missed before, and it blows my mind. So in this one, I was paying a bit more attention than usual when the hunter explains how he figured out where Bella was and how he decided to lure Bella into being in this ballet studio, blah blah blah. And for the first time I realised that the only reason that he knows where Bella is because all of them are relying on Alice's visions so much, and because they're playing off of Alice's visions before the hunters quite figured things out, and because they act in certain ways, then therefore the hunter figures things out and Alice's vision becomes true because of the fact that they're acting preemptively. So just like a time paradox, you have a vision paradox. That's so Raven does the vision paradox dynamic well every single time. And for the first time ever, I realized that this book actually is based on that idea as well, at least for the last actiony bit. We also have Edward sucking the venom out of Bella's hand, and I just can't help but think how different would this series have been if he let the venom spread, just because in all of the cases where somebody's after Bella, Bella could, you know, fight with them, or Jacob wouldn't have been such a big influence in these books. Then we're in the hospital, and when Edward kisses her in the hospital, her heart literally stops. That is the most dramatic and over-the-top thing ever. Also, there's a line where Bella's like, oh, his breath calmed me down, and I'm like, what do you mean his breath calmed you down, or the sweetness of his breath calmed you down? Just stop, honey, just stop. Also, Bella's like, why didn't you just let the venom spread and let me become a vampire? And Edward's like, no, that's not gonna happen. And Bella replies to that saying, this is not the end of the conversation. And that girl, she continues the conversation for another 3 whole books. That's what I like to call determination. Then they go to prom, and Bella mentions not liking surprises. I don't like surprises as well. Bella doesn't like surprises in Snow. Are we the same person? No, because I'd never be like her. But it's nice to see those commonalities. I also always distinctly remember the scene where Bella's like, look at this shoe. It's going to kill me. And Edward just stares at her leg and is like, thank you. And I'm just like, I don't know why, but teenage me was like, oh my gosh, look at that. And now I'm just laughing. Judging from the past 4 Read It Backwards videos that you have watched of me critiquing and reading the Twilight Saga, you would think that I don't love this series, but I do, I really do. I just can't help but be more critical when I'm reading this time round, just because of the sake of the Read It Backwards and what the Read It Backwards is supposed to be. But I do love this series. This is my favourite one in the series. But apart from New Moon, I do love all 3 of these books, and I have reread them countless times. So that is it. If I had to rate this book now, I'd probably give it 5 stars, because I've got nostalgia and I'm shady and I actually really like this book. But I'd probably still give it 5 stars. Let's not talk about that. But I do want to mention that the next Read It Backwards is going to be me starting to reread the Percy Jackson series. So if you've read that series, please join me along for that. And I'll be back next month with another Read It Backwards. Please put in your comment down below heart emoji, any heart that you want, because of the fact that this book is all about first love. And yes, that is all. Please let me know in the comment section down below, do you agree or disagree with anything that I said? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't you forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards, Excelsior!